You are Locked On Wolverines, your daily podcast on the Michigan Wolverines, part of the Locked On Podcast Network.
Happy Monday. We are finally back. Locked On Wolverines podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it is your team every day. I am your man on the ground, Isaiah Hole, publisher of Wolverines Wire through USA Today Sports Media Group. Obviously, we are going to spend the bulk of this show, the first two segments, discussing Juwan Howard and everything that transpired in Madison. We now know what his suspension is, which is kind of why I wanted to wait to do this so that wasn't outdated. But we're going to get to that, and then we're going to welcome on Pro Football Focus Director of Content, Austin Gayle, who is going to, and you'll see a wardrobe change if you're watching on YouTube, who discusses the new project that's going to be very popular with Michigan fans, and that is this four-part podcast called Hutch, and it's detailing everything Aidan Hutchinson. It's going to be huge. It's going to be big. So excited to delve into it with him. But before we begin in any of that stuff, I do want to say both I'm sorry and thank you for a lot of your well wishes and your prayers. I did not do a podcast on Thursday or Friday. Unfortunately, my grandfather, the most important man in my life, he did pass away on Friday morning. So thank you very much for all of your prayers, all of the well wishes that I received on Twitter. It's obviously been a difficult it's been a difficult month, but I thank you all for your patience, and I thank you all for sticking along with me as I go through all of this. But we will try to be back as much as we can this week, but you know how it goes, I am sure. But anyway, let's get into the Juwan Howard of it all. So, the first thing that I got back to doing in a 3-day period was to cover the Michigan basketball game. Not in Madison. I did it from home. And as I go to hit publish on my 5 takeaways, you all saw what happened. From the everything that happened in the handshake line to I'm going to call it strike of Joe Klabbenhoft. That's the most Wisconsin name I've ever heard, by the way. To throwing hands by both Terrence Williams and Moussa Diabate, although that looked like that was instigated by number 0 of Wisconsin. We now have a pretty good idea of what transpired. So just for the sake of doing it, for those who haven't zaprooted the film, here's what's happened. So Juwan in Michigan basketball down 16, I believe it was, with 15 seconds left, were pressing on defense as Wisconsin was looking to get an inbound after there was a steal by Devontae Jones and a layup. And that resulted in a timeout by Greg Gard, who reportedly just wanted to advance the ball to half court. Still, it didn't sit right with Juwan Howard, who glared over at the bench. And then in the handshake line, he, as they were walking past, he lowered his mask and said, "I will remember that expletive." And Greg Gard grabbed him. Which, if you know anything about Juwan, he does not like that type of thing. And he said, "Don't you expletive touch me." And then it just continued to escalate until Juwan was back behind the action, being separated. Joe Klabbenhoft decided he was going to get in on the action, started pushing what looked like Terrence Williams, a little bit of Jerron Faulds, who were seemingly trying to beat people back. And then Juwan, looking right at that action, struck Joe Klabbenhoft with an open hand. It wasn't a full punch. Making that distinction because there does deserve to be nuance. I'm sorry, Michigan State fans, if you're watching or listening to this. I'm gonna use some nuance. Right? I know you just want to say he pulled out a machete and he just started slicing. No, didn't happen. Okay? So then from there was another assistant coach who tried to get under Terrence Williams, and Terrence Williams basically pulled him down to the ground. He got up and tried to get him again. Terrence Williams pulled him down to the ground again. That made number 0 come out and take a swing at Terrence Williams, and he did connect with him. Terrence Williams then hit him, as did Moussa Diabate. And then at that point, I think that's when it kind of separated. So I think that covers the fracas, the melee that took place. So my thoughts, I tweeted my thoughts, and I know I got a lot of pushback from people because I said, whatever Juwan gets, he deserves. I stand by that, and I know that people are saying, well, not fired, and I'm not saying that, I wasn't saying he should be fired, but I was saying if he gets that, when you hit somebody, it doesn't really matter if I admire that he was seemingly doing it to protect his players, and his players clearly loved it, based off of what Hunter said and what some others have said, and, you see what other people on Twitter, Michigan football people, Khalid Hill and Quinn Nordine, they all loved it, Desmond Howard and such. But in those types of moments, when you are the adult in the room, a cooler head has to prevail, and you just can't strike somebody. I mean, I know, listen, Woody Hayes got fired for exactly that. It was a player, not an assistant. I don't think it matters. And I think if it was a closed fist, it probably would have been the difference. The fact that it wasn't, and the slow motion, if you've seen the slow motion video, it's funny because it almost looks like he's caressing him very fast. But it's one of those things where I feel like, yeah, it shouldn't necessarily result in a firing, but if it did, I'd say that's what it is, because you know what, it's difficult, especially if you're Michigan, to be like, hey, come, we're leaders and best. By the way, our coach hit people, regardless of the circumstances. It's inexcusable, no matter which way you do it. If you're supposed to be the head basketball coach of the University of Michigan, you cannot. And keep in mind, I love Juwan. I have a relationship with Juwan outside of here, and it's a good one. But I have to be honest and tell you that there's no excuse for laying hands on another person from the other team, from your team, any of that stuff. I'm not being soft. I'm just telling you that there is no excuse for it. That said, we do have a suspension, according to Dan Wetzel from Yahoo, and what it is. And I think it's absolutely appropriate given everything that ended up transpiring. Because if it was strictly one-sided, if it was strictly Juwan was just doing what he was doing without any other provocation and without all these other things happening, I think it could be, then it certainly would be worse. But we have a suspension. We're going to talk about that momentarily. But before we do, and I'm completely in just my complete daze here, have forgotten to tell you what I've got to figure out what I got to tell you about. So, it's Bet Online. So football might be over for the season, but basketball is full steam ahead for both pro and college hoops. From all the latest odds, totals, player performance props to where the next fired coach is going to land, BetOnline.net is the number one spot for all your sports betting needs. BetOnline remains the best spot for all your sports scores, podcasts, and news this season. And it's not just basketball. BetOnline.net is your source for hockey, boxing, UFC odds, right to Olympic coverage and information. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in action. BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, let's continue on here, because now we know what the suspension is going to be, according to Yahoo's Dan Wetzel, who says that the Big Ten will be announcing, for Juwan at least, we don't know about any of the players. You know that there's going to be some for the players, although, I mean, I think that it's got to be everybody, right, that was really, right, I mean, Terrence and Moussa, seriously, but number 0 as well for Wisconsin for provoking. I think the assistant coaches, Joe Klabbenhoft, and the other one, I don't remember his name. I think that they deserve suspensions as well. I wouldn't be opposed to one for Greg Gard as well for, like a one-game type thing, just given, like, his escalation of the situation, I guess. But putting his hands on him, which is a difficult situation, of course. But it is the last 5 games of the regular season, which is not ideal, kind of given that it's a tough stretch. They need those games. They need to do more than split probably, but nonetheless, I mean, they've got let's see, I don't have it up here, but they have Rutgers and Iowa, Michigan State, Illinois, and let's see, well, in order: Rutgers, Illinois, Michigan State, Iowa, and Ohio State. So, and 4 of those are at home, which is good. Ohio State is on the road as the regular season finale, but Juwan will be eligible to return, assuming that Michigan doesn't heap anything else on, and I can't imagine that it will. But given Ward's statement, but they will be. That I think that's appropriate, right? 5 games, the rest of the regular season. I think that punishment fits the crime. Now, a lot of rivals have talked about, particularly rivals, have talked about the Maryland game in the Big Ten tournament from last year. Listen, that's a non-starter to me. Like, yeah, he got riled up. He had to be held back and restrained. He was nowhere close to Mark Turgeon. That wasn't assault. I mean, it's ridiculous. But the annoying thing, and I think it is an embarrassment in the sense that now, like, it's hard to take the high ground regardless of kind of what happened going forward, you know, and it's self-imposed. And I'm sure there's a lot of you out there that are embarrassed, a lot of you out there who are proud. I lean more towards embarrassed than not. But it's probably not quite as bad now that we know all the facts. That said, again, still very inexcusable. You can't have it. You can't do it. There's zero excuse for it. And I want to make that clear in the broadest of terms. But of course, you see the rival fans hopping on this, like, again, with the machete metaphor, as if Juwan was out there just cutting people down and all of this stuff. And there's a lot of other histrionics that kind of come into play in the situation that are unnecessary. But it's an embarrassing situation, to be sure, especially and when Michigan has had center stage in this. Juwan is being mentioned by people who I never thought I would ever, when I'm like doing my Twitter reactions stuff, I never thought I would see certain people even discussing Juwan Howard, and that's where we're at. You know, Michigan is in the news for all the wrong reasons. I mean, and then you see people. I'm not even going to give Lynn Henning's Twitter. Well, I will. I mean, like talking of the histrionics, like Lynn Henning saying that Michigan should have 2 new coaches because Harbaugh flirted with the NFL and says Juwan's on death row. That's just tone deaf. Again, I'm not really big on, you know, on that type of stuff in the sense of like calling it out, but there's just a lot of ridiculousness surrounding this. Like, people want to one up each other on how more ridiculous they can get. And that's not what we're going to do here, of course. But whatever you feel about the situation, I feel like you're entitled to feel. The way I feel about it is that it was an embarrassment and that it shouldn't have happened, but the punishment fits the crime. I'm glad he's not fired. I think that would have been a massive overreaction. Given, like, there was a little restraint there, he was coming to his player's defense. If he wasn't coming to his player's defense and he's just out there throwing blows and it's a closed fist, I mean, gone yesterday. You know, he doesn't even get on the plane to come back, which obviously that isn't what happened. So I'm glad it's sorted, and it is what it is. And it's weird that we're talking about this. We're talking about a basketball negative happening on the day that spring football started. Because, by the way, spring football started today. So anyway, all right, we're going to get to Austin Gayle. We had a great conversation about Hutch. You're going to want to hear everything he has to say. He shared a little bit of insight as to some of the things that he's learned so far. They're still conducting interviews and such. I interviewed with them as well today, so I'll be involved in their podcast as well. So you're definitely going to want to check that out. So definitely stay tuned to check out our conversation. But before we do, got to tell you a little something about Built Bar. Y'all know how much I love Built Bar. I have so many. I mean, I still have some left because I'm just kind of rationing at this point. But I've bought dozens of boxes of my own volition. If you don't know what Built Bar is, it's a delicious protein bar that tastes like a candy bar. It's high protein, low calorie, low carb. It's literally everything that I need for my diet, my macros, as I attempt to get back in shape very poorly. But Built Bar is going to be continue to be a staple of that. So do like me. Don't delay. Go to built.com. Use the promo code LOCKED15. That's built.com, promo code LOCKED15 to get 15% off of your next order of Built Bar. And we are back, and we have a special guest. As mentioned, we've got Pro Football Focus Director of Content, Austin Gayle, with us today. And he's going to talk about something that's not only huge for them, but it's something that Michigan fans in particular are going to absolutely love. Austin, first off, thank you first and foremost for joining the show, man.
Absolutely. I appreciate you having me on.
Well, normally when you come on, we're picking your brain about what's going on with the Michigan football team, like what your expectations are, going into a game or coming out of a game, all that kind of stuff. But today we're doing something a little bit different because you have a new podcast you're launching called Hutch, and you're actually bringing on former Michigan edge rusher Aidan Hutchinson, and this is a multi-part deal. So tell me a little bit more about what the actual project is.
Yeah, I mean, we are super excited to launch Hutch with Aidan Hutchinson and Radigan Sports, his marketing agency. The whole goal really is to create a 4-part podcast series, roughly 4 to 5 hours of content in total on Aidan Hutchinson and his story to all the way dating back to his, early childhood, high school experience with football. I'm talking to his mom on Wednesday, his dad on Wednesday, his sisters, who are all heavily, heavily involved in his life. It's wild how much I've learned already about the support he's got from his family. I've also had opportunities to talk with former teammates, right? David Ajabo, Kwity Paye, former coaches, Don Brown. We were really his roommate from his freshman year at Michigan. We're really excited to, peel back the curtain on Aidan Hutchinson for a piece of content, right, that I just don't think we see a lot of on projected number 1 overall picks or projected top 5 picks before the draft, right? Like, yeah, there will be some extensive interviews in the pre-draft process from ESPN, Bleacher Report. You'll see some of these other bigger outlets attack Aidan Hutchinson and attack the Aidan Hutchinson content angle, but no one is going to have this much content, this much of a peeled back curtain than us with this podcast. And you couldn't have picked a better player for it, right? A guy that has a chance to go number 1 overall, feel like his floor is the top 3 of this draft class, and a guy that just has such a unique background with his family and how he's really risen to the occasion and become one of Michigan football's biggest stars.
So with that in mind, like what was the impetus for this? What made you decide that you were going to do a project of this scale, and what made you decide on Aidan as your particular focus on this?
I think starting with why Aidan, right? He's the number 1 overall player in PFF's draft, in PFF's opinion, in this class. And he's someone that has graded super well in our system. A guy that, compares to Chase Young, both of the Bosas from a grading perspective. Like, he's that good of a player, put that good of a season together. It was a very storied season for Michigan, obviously, going from unranked in the preseason to obviously the college football playoff. They won their Big Ten championship. And then you come into this pre-draft process where he's a projected number 1 overall pick, right? It's going to be between him, Evan Neal, Kayvon Thibodeau. Those are the names that are being thrown around. I just don't think all of that combined, right? You couldn't have come with a better, PFF is so uniquely positioned to cover his story best, right? From a grading perspective, what we've seen him do at Michigan, having him as our top player in this draft. And then also just, the extent that we're going to going into his background and looking at that stuff. I have a lot of experience interviewing draft prospects in 15 to 30 minute intervals, but never have had this opportunity to sit down with a guy for 2-3 days, right, and talk to his mom and talk to his family. That, I think, is going to really just show how good of a player he is on and off the field.
Now, you said that you've learned a ton of interesting things so far. Without spoiling much of anything that people can learn, what's one of the more interesting things that you can share that you have learned about Aidan, just to kind of whet our appetite a little bit? Give us a little bit of a teaser of what fans can expect.
Talking to Don Brown, a former coach at Michigan, who's now the head coach at UMass, and then also David Ajabo, Kwity Paye, this guy craves adversity, right? There will be times in practice where Aidan is asking David Ojabo to go toe-to-toe him in a straight line race. David Ojabo is 15 pounds lighter and faster, more explosive in a lot of ways. And Aidan wants to go toe-to-toe with David Ojabo, show that he could beat him in a race. Ojabo would talk about when he'd get into the weight room, he'd ask their strength and conditioning coach to ring him out and to treat him as he does every other player, right? Like, I know I'm the big guy on campus, but I want, that same respect, right, that other people get. I think this guy wants to be the best every single day. And that's reflected too, having conversations with him already in his diet. No caffeine, no sugar, no alcohol, no gluten. He does not do anything that does not get prescribed by a doctor at this point. He's on the glorified TB12 diet at this point. And just that level of prioritization in your craft, right, is just rare. And all of these NFL players are rare athletes and rare people to just even be in consideration to go into the NFL draft. But to this guy, in every phase of his life, is prioritizing being the best he possibly can be on the football field. And obviously he wants to be a good person and all that stuff, but every decision he makes is to be better on the football field. And that's evident in the growth that he had at Michigan. That's evident in the season that he had in 2021. And then obviously it's evident in how much this teams are going to come away impressed with him at the combine and in this interview process. Like, there is not so far, right, any chink in this dude's armor. I'm trying to find an imperfection, and he just continues to show out every time I talk to him.
Now, you said this is going to be 4 episodes. Can you tell me a little bit more about what each is going to entail, what it's going to be like, how, and what the frequency is, how long you think they're going to be, all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, they're probably going to be, 45 minutes to an hour long in length. Maybe some go longer, right? The later episodes potentially going longer. And how we're currently approaching the storyboard is, first episode, really doing all that we can to cover the background, like before Michigan for Aidan Hutchinson, right? Obviously, a bulk majority of the podcast will be spent on the time that you had at Michigan, specifically the 2021 season. But this opening episode, we really want to dive into, what makes Aidan tick, right? And what his, the support he had in high school, his recruiting process, why he chose Michigan, why he chose to join Jim Harbaugh, et cetera. I think that's going to be just something that sets the tone or sets the stage for the type of person he is. And then from there, it's his freshman, sophomore, and junior campaigns, his decision to come back to Michigan, his overcome of that injury. And then the last 2 episodes, the plan right now is to make them all about this 2021 campaign, right? Looking at each game in particular, looking at the offseason leading up to it. So many of the conversations I've had is that Aidan Hutchinson approached the offseason prior to the 2021 season like no other player. And he knew going into that year that they weren't ranked on the preseason board. And he knew that they were better than that. And he was, a leader for this team. And then last episode, we'll really focus on a lot of that 2021 season, their run to the college football playoff, and just how much he's preparing for the 2022 NFL draft and the pre-draft process.
Well, I can say you can't have picked a better subject. He's obviously well endeared to the Michigan faithful. I'm excited to take part in this and share the stories that I have about Aidan and everything. So, Austin, thanks for coming on and sharing a little bit about this. I know Michigan fans are going to be amped up once this releases. When is your target to get this out?
Yeah, our goal right now is April 2022. We do have a date in mind that we're mapping to, not ready to kind of like commit to it yet. It could come out earlier in April. It could come out a little bit later in April, depending on, how some of these recordings go, right? We are looking to bring on everyone and anyone that can help tell Aidan's story, right? We want to talk to every single piece of the puzzle here. And that obviously is going to take time and something that we're really excited about. We're not cutting corners, right? Like, this is 4 episodes on Aidan Hutchinson that we feel needs to cover, soup to nuts, everything that he has been so far and what his, impact has been on football and college football and Michigan itself.
Well, April 22nd, I already have that ingrained in my mind, not because it's Earth Day, but also because my favorite band, North Lane, is releasing an album that day. So I'm going to have a lot of content on that day. Anyway, thank you, Austin. Thank you. Appreciate you joining us, man.
Absolutely. Thank you.
All right. And for all of you watching and or listening, appreciate it. We will talk to you again soon. Peace.